Hi, it's Jason Gorber from ThatShelf.com, and we're here to talk about the latest Pixar film, Onward. It's the latest from Pixar, directed by Dan Scanlon. It stars Tom Holland, Chris Pratt, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and Octavia Spencer's got a role in it. Onward's pretty interesting, actually. Pixar's going through a kind of revitalization. Look, the sort of elephant in the room, as it were, is that John Lasseter is no longer part of the company after he got kicked out after some behavior which was not considered conducive to the running of a major animation studio. Because of that, Pixar's been in kind of an identity crisis, doesn't really know what to do. It's really good at doing its sequels, and actually Toy Story 4 showed that it still had a little bit of the magic to create, but they've had a rough time of late of finding their own footing on getting original stories out there. Disney, on the other hand, which had decades of floundering, frankly, after their revitalization, unironically, with a film with a flounder in it, Little Mermaid, you saw a sort of dearth. They had this big rise, but when Pixar really came to the fore, you saw them also losing their footing. But once they got their stuff together, once you saw stuff like Tangled, obviously the explosion that was Frozen, things like Zootopia, the Disney side of the animation studio, I think, really found the stories that it wanted to tell and told them extremely well, whereas Pixar really lost some of its spark. I don't know whether this film completely recaptures it, but I found myself watching the film not sure where it was going to go, and that was, believe it or not, incredibly refreshing. There's this sense of a quest, which is central to the storyline. Obviously, it's a very D&D oriented storyline. It's kind of goofy and kind of silly, but also profound the way that Pixar films tend to be. But there's this sense that the story is finding itself, that the studio itself is on this sort of quest to do something that both reaches mass audiences, which is what something that obviously the Disney Corporation wants to see happen, but also speaks to the fundamentals of storytelling. I frankly haven't seen a film exactly like this before. It wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be, which is essentially like a Monsters, Inc., except with fantasy characters. This is actually directed by the guy behind the Monsters, Inc. Sequel, Monsters University, which again I thought was entirely forgettable. This film, though, has a charm and a sort of sophistication of storytelling which is absolutely evocative of Pixar in its prime. It may not sort of immediately explode off the screen as something incredibly original, but frankly, we've just seen many of these films. I mean, animation as a genre is one thing, but animation as a shtick, as what Pixar is really good at, is something sort of impossible to not continue to replicate. They have a certain style, a certain formulaic nature, which at the beginning was so refreshing, and then once we've seen it over and over again, it doesn't quite work as well. But this one, because of the way it's structured, I thought sort of for the first 25-30 minutes of the film, like, oh, this is what I'm going to get. Something that's kind of like Zootopia, that you have this world that is, for lack of a better word, anthropomorphic, of all these creatures sort of living the mundane, quotidian city life, but there are these strange and extraordinary characters in Zootopia. They're a bunch of essentially earth animals, and then this are essentially a bunch of mystical creatures. But this one actually found, again, what speaks to its central storyline, which is this core magic. As the film gets along, and these characters, these two brothers, sort of finding each other, confrontation, the third act really allows the film to shine. It really actually provokes not only sort of the deep emotions which are necessarily brought to the fore in these kind of films, but I felt that it connected to the storyline and the type of story that it wanted to play, and still gave it the scope and the majesty of something that frankly is borrowed heavily, again, from the likes of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, this should be a mix of something that's nerdy and fun and sweet and charming and adventurous and slightly dark and dirty at sometimes, and really by the end of it really does check off all of those boxes. I don't know how well it's going to age. I don't know how well it's going to be received. I don't really care. As a film, it just felt like it was doing something fresh and exciting, while still evoking all the things that it's nostalgic for. And that's a weird balance to actually to have something that feels very much of the past and something that feels definitely speaking to the here and now. It doesn't feel forced in the best way. It feels like it earns all of its hit points. It earns all of its things as it goes along. And that's the best thing that I can say about it. Whether it sort of ranks up in the classic of pantheon of Pixar, I doubt it. But it certainly is a solid storytelling. And it feels like a studio that is very much still willing to take risks, frankly. That's very much willing to take a story which is not just a rehash, which is not just yet another sequel or or some sort of storyline that we know exactly where it's going to play out. Yes, it evokes the world of role-playing games and Dungeons & Dragons, but it definitely makes it its own thing in the way that it actually twists all these elements together, and that whole notion that underneath our sort of regular everyday work, there is this sense of sort of adventure quest and magic behind us. It's a fun soundtrack, there's a painted van, there's a good dynamic between all the performers, and very much this is a story of fraternal love and challenge and all this stuff that actually goes along with that. And so in the end, I really think that's a lot of fun. So it's the latest Pixar film, Onward to go see Onward. I'm Jason Gorber for ThatShelf.com. Please subscribe. Please check us out on social media. And thanks very much for watching. Till next time. Cheers.